This video is an example of combat for newcomers to DBR between three elements of Spahi Ordinary who have moved into combat this turn: Shot Ordinary, Pike Ordinary, an Artillery Inferior, and the element in red with the tricorn being the General. Each element in DBR has a combat or shooting factor which it adds to a D6. That score is modified by rear support, flank support, and overlaps. Each combat is done on an element versus element basis, and the order of the combat is chosen by the player whose turn it is. For the purpose of our example, the Spahi player moved into combat and it is their turn, so elects to do the combat where the Spahi is facing the artillery. It is convenient to work out the factors for each of the elements before rolling a d6 and adding the score. The Spahi has a factor of 3 against the artillery, which is classified as train, but is overlapped, so receives a -1. In this respect, the Spahi's combat factor without adding the die score to it will be 2. The artillery has a combat factor of 3, but receives a +1 for being supported by shot to its flank, observing that regardless of whether both flanks are supported, only one +1 is applicable, as well as a +1 for being in combat, no doubt to simulate a close range shot, as that +1 modifier also includes when artillery are shooting at enemy within 100 paces. The effect of the modifiers to the artillery is that it has a combat factor without adding the dice score of 5. To summarise, the artillery is 5 and the Spahi is 2. They each roll a d6. The Spahi scores a 4, which brings its combat score to 6, and the artillery rolls a 5, which brings its combat score to 10. The artillery has not doubled the Spahi element, and so as a result, it recoils. The combat results table is divided between two circumstances, the first being if the losing element's total is less than that of the enemy, but more than half, or the losing element's total is half or less than that of the enemy. Players often couch this in practical terms of whether the winning element doubled the losing element or not. The Spahi player then chooses to do the combat between the pikeman and the Spahi on the right flank. Whilst the Spahi starts with a factor of 3, it is overlapped, which brings it down to 2, and the pikeman is supported by shot, which gives an extra -1 to the Spahi, bringing it down to 1. The pikeman is 4 and has a second rank, which it can add to make 5. The players each roll a dice and the Spahi rolls a 6, bringing its total combat score to 7, and the pike rolls a 1, bringing its combat score to 6. At 7 to 6, the Spahi has won, and the pikes are recoiled. The final combat to be chosen is that between the general of the pike and shot and the centre Spahi. The Spahi is again a factor of 3, but it is overlapped, and so that factor comes down to 2. The shot is a general, starts with a factor of 2 and adds 1 for being a general, making it 3. It then adds 1 for having a second rank against cavalry in an enemy bound, that being the turn in which the cavalry charge in. It then adds another 1 for being supported by artillery inferior. This leaves the general with a factor of 5 against the Spahi, but it is also overlapped, bringing it down to a 4. To summarise, the factors are the Spahi is at 2 and the general shot is at 4. They each roll a dice, and the Spahi rolls a 6, and the general rolls a 1. This means the Sipahi is on a total factor of 8 and the general is on a total factor of 5. Whilst the general shot is not less than half of the enemy, certain troop types are destroyed regardless. This is colloquially called a quick kill and is part of the scissor, paper, rock type mechanism that DBR employs. Shot are destroyed by Spahis in an enemy bound if in going those types count as good. For our example, both combatants are in good going and the Spahi has finished combat with a score of 8 whilst the general has finished combat with a score of 5. Under those circumstances, the general is destroyed. Immediately following the calculation of the outcome, the Sipahi player must determine whether or not it can follow up and whether it will. For Spahis, not part of an already demoralised command, they may elect to follow up. The outcome between the combatants was 8-5, and so the Spahi may follow up 3 base depths. The player chooses to do so, and the Spahi pushes through the gap left by the general, 3 base depths. Spahi may not elect to follow up less, and had the Spahi met enemy in the process of following up, subject to the Spahi having sufficient movement and room, they would conform for the purpose of a further combat to be fought in the next turn, that being the turn of the shot player. We hope this assists and we hope to see you at CanCon 2025.